From the Gulf States Newsroom, this is the Gulf States Gumbo, your weekly serving of stories from Alabama, Mississippi, and Louisiana. I'm senior reporter Drew Hawkins, chopping it up this week. Last week, we brought you a conversation with drug historian and author Emily Dufton about the history of medication-assisted treatment, or MAT. It's an approach to addiction treatment, one of many supports that can help people struggling with addiction. This week, we're bringing you a sampling of a new podcast from our partners at Deep South Today. Black Box is a 5-part series that follows Mississippi Today's mental health reporter Alan Siegler's work tracking the state's opioid settlement funds and the people it's supposed to help. It really drives home the importance of having every tool available for treating addiction, and how Mississippi has or has not used money intended to help with the opioid crisis to expand access to MAT, rehab, Narcan, and other supports. So we'll listen to the opening of the first episode and then stick around, because after, we'll have a conversation with Alan about his reporting and what he's learned covering addiction in Mississippi.
Jonathan, into the microphone.
We're on family property.
We're on a street that's named after your grandfather?
Grandfather.
Wow.
Yes. So we were in the military. And
on a weekday in October 2025, Jonathan and Shelby Altman welcomed me into their home in Sumrall, Mississippi. It's a sanctuary for the Altmans and their 2 cats and 3 dogs. Their German Shepherd, Caesar, weaves between microphone cables as we sit down at their kitchen table.
Doesn't this feel fancy?
Yeah, I got Caesar here.
We will have a little bit of background.
Jonathan and Shelby met in Hawaii in 1988. He was in the Army. She was in the Navy. They met on a base in Oahu.
What drew you to each other?
her uniform and legs.
His biceps. Yeah, that was kind of how we caught each other's eye.
Just before Shelby was set to leave Hawaii, she got pregnant.
What was going through your head, having this child while both of y'all were still in active duty?
Excitement for him. I was a little hesitant. Yeah. I thought he was great and handsome and wonderful, but I was going to see the world. And then I had a little baby with me. But Chelsea was our little angel child because she brought us together.
Yeah.
Chelsea Altman was born on October 13th, 1989.
She was her own, smart as a whip, but if she didn't want to do it, she wasn't going to do it. Mm-hmm. So she definitely had a mind of her own and kind of did what she liked to do. What do we call her?
She was a free spirit.
Yeah, free spirit. There you go.
In 2005, when Chelsea was 16 years old, she had dental surgery to adjust her overbite. Afterward, she was prescribed some pills to treat the pain. While Chelsea grew up, new drugs had been making waves in the medical community. Big pharmaceutical companies heavily marketed opioid prescription painkillers to doctors. They said it could get rid of their patients' chronic pain, with little to no side effects. That last part was a lie, spread by drug companies. But most people, including the Altmans, didn't know it.
We didn't know. As parents, they don't say, well, we're going to give you this for your child, but make sure she doesn't become addicted to this. It was, take this, which she did. And there was one point where I went in and I thought maybe she'd taken more than she should have. And I said, have you taken more pills? No, Mommy.
And that's what started a lifetime of turmoil.
Before Chelsea reached adulthood, prescription pain pills like OxyContin had become some of the most popular medications in the country. But for millions of people like her, the pills were also highly addictive. Chelsea's life was dominated by using drugs, getting clean, and then relapsing. By the 2010s, many people, like Chelsea, started their addiction not with a drug dealer, but instead with a prescription. Some of America's biggest companies contributed to the crisis. Manufacturers lied about how addictive and deadly their medications could become. Distributors turned a blind eye as they flooded America's counties with these dangerous products. And pharmacies filled millions of prescriptions they knew could be misused. Cities and states, including Mississippi, took notice. Thousands of governments began suing some of the country's biggest companies for the part they played. Household names like Walmart, Johnson & Johnson, Walgreens, and many more. Government officials tried to stop this prescription cycle in the years that followed. But that didn't end the opioid epidemic. It made it worse. Chelsea and others struggling with addiction switched from painkillers to more dangerous opioids, ones that could be easily bought on the street, like heroin and fentanyl. Overdose deaths rose to rates the country had never seen before. In 2018, the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention called this the public health crisis of our time. States said they needed billions of dollars to address the opioid epidemic and to keep people alive. And these lawsuits started to get combined into a series of larger cases. In 2021, those companies began reaching historic legal settlements. Over the next few years, they agreed to pay tens of billions of dollars for their role in fueling the opioid epidemic. After years of litigation, Mississippi, the country's poorest state, was set to receive $430 million. But simply receiving that money didn't end the crisis. Many Mississippians, like Chelsea, continued to struggle. By 2024, the opioid epidemic had grown much worse. Chelsea had spent nearly 2 decades trying to overcome her addiction. It hadn't worked. On a Sunday in May 2025, Jonathan sent Chelsea a Happy Mother's Day text. She didn't respond. He noticed that the family's cats and dogs looked hungry. Chelsea was supposed to feed them. Finally, he drove to where Chelsea lived, looking for her.
When I got there, the car was there. Doors were shut, locked, and went to the back bedroom, and I could see the lights on in there. I couldn't see in the window. Call the cops. Do you want me to go into the rest of it?
Officers showed up and went into the home. Jonathan stayed a few yards back, watching them file into Chelsea's room.
And I just had the most blinding light surround me. I could see absolutely nothing but white light. And a flood of just like I was in a warm shower, just from my head to my toes. And I thought to myself, Chelsea has just seen the face of God.
On May 11th, 2025, Chelsea Altman Sadler died of a drug overdose. She was 35 years old. When Chelsea took her last breath, the Altmans didn't know that Mississippi had money that could have saved her life. The companies that had contributed to her addiction were paying what the judge said they owed. But the public didn't know how it was being used. So I had requested public records. I asked for how much money they'd received and how they were spending it. And I was able to show it to y'all and get your perspective on it. When you learned about that, how did you feel?
Very frustrating. Very frustrating, because that, to me, that's just a huge pot of money that is going to be pissed away.
That was the beginning of the first episode of Black Box, a new podcast series from Deep South Today that follows Mississippi's opioid settlement funds. Mississippi Today's Alan Siegler is here to talk more about his work. Hey, Alan.
Yeah, so I went to college in the late 2010s. I worked a little bit for my college newspaper there, and I worked on the science technology desk. Mostly what I was doing was just writing up studies, but I also did start reporting a little bit on something that I guess listeners heard a little bit from last week on medication-assisted treatment. There was an opioid treatment program near my college campus that had been in the news a lot. So that reporting introduced me to 3 things. One, that we were in the midst of this devastating opioid epidemic that was tens of thousands of American lives every year. You know, a crisis that the Surgeon General at the time was calling the public health crisis of our time. 2, that there were effective treatments for this disorder. And 3, that these tools weren't always accessible to the people who most needed them. So that really stuck with me as I went to grad school. I got a master's in public health, and it actually was a big reason why I ended up moving to West Virginia after grad school. It was one of my first full-time reporting jobs. I was the public health reporter at an investigative news outlet called Mountain State Spotlight. And West Virginia has been the state that's just been most devastated by the crisis since the 2010s. There's a lot of reasons for that. A very big one is what was revealed in many lawsuits that states filed. Some of America's biggest companies contributed to this epidemic and targeted specific communities by marketing prescription opioid painkillers in ways that endangered the public.
So I know this isn't your first time covering this issue. I wonder if you can take us through your experience covering addiction and opioid settlement funds in other states and how it compares to covering it in Mississippi.
Yeah, so West Virginia really was the place, more so than any state, that was targeted by this crisis. And it's reflected in its death count. More people per capita overdosed in West Virginia a year than anywhere else. West Virginia was getting a lot of opioid settlement money because of that. And it was just starting to roll out when I was reporting there. And already there, we could see that some of this money wasn't exactly going for things that I think the public thought that it would be spent for initially. We saw sometimes it was being spent like that in West Virginia. Other times, one of the stories I reported was that it was going for a shooting range. We're just kind of starting to see how city, county officials, how the state was considering this money. And, I moved to Mississippi. I got started on the health team here, and my then boss, Kate Royals, who's since been promoted to managing editor, she knew I'd done some reporting in West Virginia, and she really hadn't heard much in Mississippi. From your reporting in Alabama and in Louisiana that when I moved here in spring 2025, a lot of other states were publicly celebrating their opioid settlement spending. They were praising their efforts to buy more naloxone, to distribute it in places to make medication-assisted treatment more accessible, to make recovery housing more accessible. I saw a lot of transportation in different states. I didn't see much in Mississippi. It wasn't that I saw spending that people, the general public, those most harmed by the crisis thought were good or bad. I just didn't see much. Neither did my boss. I do think that if this had been publicly available information about what was happening with the opioid settlements, it would have come up on Mississippi Today's health team's radar.
So you arrived in Mississippi, right? You've been reporting on this in West Virginia. Take me through what you started to do to dive into this issue in Mississippi.
Yeah. So just for a little background, Mississippi splits its opioid settlement money up. Some of it goes to cities and counties across Mississippi. Most of it's controlled by the legislature. And most of that portion has to go for programs that directly address addiction. And a small portion of the legislature's money can also go for whatever lawmakers see fit. When I moved to Mississippi in April 2025, it was right after the regular legislative session in 2025. Lawmakers had passed a bill to basically create a plan to start spending their share of the money. That law did not include one mention of the local, county, city money. This money was going out. Checks had been sent since 2022. It was almost like it just had been forgotten by a lot of people. But it was going out. We knew it was going out. So one of the first things I did when I moved here was first, I tried to better understand the bill that the legislature had passed. I also made a phone call to someone you and I have talked to a lot, a guy named James Moore. He's a recovery advocate in Hattiesburg. He runs a bike shop there. His son, Jeffrey, unfortunately, died of an opioid overdose about 11 years ago now. Since then, he's become just a very strong addiction prevention, overdose prevention advocate. So I heard that he was pretty involved in overdose prevention, and I asked what was going on with local opioid settlements, what was going on in Hattiesburg, what was going on in Forest County and Lamar County. And he didn't know, which was really surprising to me. That was 3 years into when I thought the cities and counties should have been getting opioid settlement money. And it was really shocking to me that like he had heard of them, but he didn't know how his city and counties were managing that money. One of the things, that are in reporters' toolkits, as you've used many times, Drew, these things called public records requests. So basically any information that's created by a public organization, whether it's like a city council or a state health department or the federal government, all of that should be accessible by the public unless there's a compelling reason that it's not, that's written into state or federal law. And Mississippi opioid settlement spending documents and receipts for getting this money, that's not off limits. So when James said that he didn't know what was going on in Hattiesburg, Forest County, Lamar County, I told him I'd file some public records requests to try to figure that out. And we did. We asked for the amount of money that each had received and how they were spending that money. And we learned how much all those three governments had received and what they were spending it on. At that point, we felt like it was important to share this information with families in the region and get their thoughts on the spending, because there was some money that was going to things like a local drug treatment court. There was also money that was going to a sheriff's department for gun flashlights and an x-ray device to scan for drugs in walls. And things that, when I told these parents who had lost children to overdoses, it was really hard for them to grapple with. And when we had that reaction, I guess that was a moment when both my editor and I decided that this was something really important to report on. One other note from that time, though, we focused on those three governments mainly because we couldn't really understand why an overdose prevention advocate so plugged into his community like James wouldn't know what's going on. But those governments sometimes responded by saying, why are you just looking at us? Like, there's 147 cities and counties across Mississippi getting this money. I didn't really have a good answer for them at the time. So later, after we had published a first story about those local governments, I went to my editor and I was like, I think I can do this. I think I can FOIA all 147. And we did.
Walk me through that experience. I mean, just the size of an undertaking, and then also having to manage what I can only imagine, and I'd like to hear more about, probably some difficult county officials that didn't necessarily want to work well with you.
Yeah. So first, we filed those 147 records requests. We got the information back. We found out that of the $124 million that Mississippi had received at the time that we could account for, less than 1% of it, less than $1 million, actually went towards direct measures that addressed addiction.
So let me stop you right there, because that is such a striking number. Less than 1%, right? Least in the country, and that's also just what you could account for, because not everybody was super responsive, right? So
yeah,
is that fair to say? I mean, it could be even lower potentially,
I think every local leader who was spending this money on addressing addiction provided us that information.
Very, very, very impressive. And we just heard at the beginning of the show from the Altman family. And, one of the things that I tell people about this reporting, I'm sure you, would recognize this, is that you meet some of the most incredible people in the world. And every conversation you have with them is hard, because the reason you're talking to them is because the worst thing that could ever happen to them happened to them. And you just talked about this moment whenever, dealing with Forest County, talking with James Moore, wanting to get some answers for them and for their community, and then having this realization that we've got to do this everywhere. And the question I would have would be kind of for this series, for Black Box, to then go and package it into a version where people can listen to these stories told by people in their own voices, which is just so powerful.
One of the things that Mississippi Today Goat Rodeo has spent time this last year while making this podcast trying to figure out is, how does something like this happen when simultaneously you have so many people outraged, and a lot of the decision makers, a lot of the people who have influence over this, are saying they really care about the crisis and that it is a big priority. In one interview that we did with a woman named Brittany Denson, who runs a recovery residence in Jackson, kind of cast a new lens over how I view the overdose crisis and public officials' management of the opioid settlements. for context too, Brittany has been in recovery, long-term recovery from opioid addiction for about 10 years now. And I asked her if she has felt like her community has been prioritized, has been trusted during the opioid settlement process. And she said no. And I was like, is that upsetting? And she said something along the lines of, well, we understand it because we were criminals. And that made me take a step back and really think about what decades of using incarceration as the tool to address addiction in the country has done in terms of trusting and prioritizing those most harmed by the overdose crisis with these funds. It's something I've been thinking about a lot, and I don't know if I have a good answer, but just even Brittany saying that has really kind of changed the way I see a lot of opioid settlement decisions. I don't know if there's any one explanation why Mississippi wasn't as quick to use its opioid settlement funds on its primary purpose compared to other states, compared to every other state. But I think through reporting Black Box, I've learned a lot about some of the factors that could have shaped it. And I guess I'm really excited to share that with the world, through these 5 episodes. I think that podcasting, I've never done anything like this before, but I'm not really an audio journalist. I'm trying it out right now, but it feels like I can capture scenes and experiences in ways I just can't in print, in ways that make me emotional, listening to them again and bringing me back to that room. And I hope other people feel that way too.
I would almost guarantee they will. Like I mentioned earlier, hearing these stories in people's own voices really, really changes how they impact you. And I don't know if you'll ever get to that answer that you're looking for, but I will say that keep doing it, and your reporting is definitely, a service to the community that's impacted by it, the people connected to that community, and informing the policy decisions that shape how this money is spent too. So really, really grateful for your reporting. Alan Siegler is the mental health reporter at Mississippi Today. His new podcast, Black Box, is out now on streaming platforms, and we'll put a link in the show notes so you can find it there. Alan, thanks so much for joining us and talking about your work and your new podcast series.
Thank you. And thank you for your incredible project that you did related to the opioid settlements in Mississippi now. I've heard from people across the country that they're really impressed with what you did.
All right, before you go, Alan, we end this show with a segment called Gulf States Gems. So it's this chance for us to shout out and highlight or show some love to something that we love about the region. So it can be anything, a restaurant, museum, landmark, a person, really, it could be anything. And I do know that we've been talking about pretty heavy subject matter, but I would love to know, because I know how much you've been all over the state with this reporting. And so I would love to know what Alan Siegler's Gulf States Gem is.
Yeah, I'm going to say local for this one. My Gulf States Gem is Riverside Community Coffee House, which is a coffee shop that got started last year by my friend Velas. He partnered with the folks who run Briarwood Arts Center here in Jackson to open a coffee shop in South Jackson. The employees are local high school students in the area. Make great coffee. I started a community garden in their area. It's just a great place. And I think it's really impressive to see how the community has invested in it.
I'll have to check it out next time I'm in Jackson. It sounds wonderful. This week's show is cooked up by the Gulf States Newsroom team. Our theme music is by DJ Supreme. Special thanks to our partner stations, WBHM, Mississippi Public Broadcasting, WWNO, and WRKF. You can find us in your podcast feeds every Friday. Look us up and be sure to subscribe. I'm your host, Drew Hawkins. Thanks for listening, and don't forget to stir your brew.